I'm the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, the leader of the Uhuru movement and the International African Revolution. Today, we are talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And as we have stated in the title, she's not our RBG. We think it's important to talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, obviously, because what is happening is every facet of the ruling class media is stuffing this image and notion of who Ruth Bader Ginsburg was and what she meant to the people down our throats. There is not a way that the fact that her death last Friday is something that could not be looked at, not be noticed, and not be considered in terms of its significance. So whether or not one is familiar with anything about the Supreme Court or not, an African colonized person in the United States or around the world had to question whether or not there was some significance to the life and death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg to the struggle that we are confronted with every day in our lives. So first of all, I just want to say that as you have seen, before the body was cold, there was this eruption of struggle around Ruth Bader Ginsburg and who was going to replace her and what that replacement was going to mean for the progress and future of people and especially of women. She has been heralded as the person who is responsible for such great changes and possibilities for women. And of course, if you're willing to accept the false assumption that there is such a thing as women in general, then perhaps there is a little truth to this assumption of her incredible significance to women. But even that is something that one has to look at with some doubt. The fact is that one of the most important things that she is recognized for is a ruling that allowed, that forced the VMI or the Virginia Military Institute that was considered and is considered the Southern West Point to integrate women into its ranks. It was something that would allow women to come and participate, to learn how to be officers, to participate in becoming forces, military forces in the service of imperialism. It's not like these women were going to be brought into an institution that was going to go out and serve women, or that was going to serve the oppressed peoples of the world, or that was going to serve workers or anything like that. This was and is an institution that is part of the process of developing cadre that will be responsible for keeping the world in the death grip of U.S. imperialism, the U.S. empire. That's one of the things she's noted for. And then, of course, one of the other things that she has come to be noted for is defense. It is assumed that the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court ruling that would provide a legal abortion for women. And again, if you are willing to accept the assumption of there being women in general, perhaps there is some legitimacy to that. But the thing that cripples that legitimacy, that understanding, is that at the very same time she was fighting for that and upholding that at the very same time that this ruling was being put forward and this debate was being carried on, indigenous women in the Americas were faced with, and I've forgotten the percentage, but a huge percentage, perhaps as many as 40 to 50% of the indigenous women were experiencing forced abortions in the United States. They were sterilizing women all over the United States, and these were indigenous people here. And then, of course, when you look at the question of rights of birth rights, when you look at African women and what happens to us, and the ability even to carry birth in many instances to full term, and the starvation and other things imposed on us, and the fact that you have women, African women, who have been placed in this situation of having to rear African children who are subject to be shot down by police in this country and face other kinds of terror of the ruling class. So I want to be clear that I am not having this discussion with you as some form of American leftist or black leftist or something like this. I'm not a leftist, and the African People's Socialist Party that I represent is not some leftist organization. To make the assumption that we're leftists assumes that there is some relationship that that has some element of legitimacy that we have with the United States government, with the United States society. And we're saying that's not the case, that African people exist in this country and around the world as colonized colonial subjects. We are not some leftists. We're not trying to have this discussion from the perspective of some leftists, which is one of the reasons why we want to cast doubt on this assumption that somehow there's such a thing as women in general. There is no such thing as women in general. There is no unity. There is no comparison that one can make between women of the oppressor nation and women of the oppressed nation. There is no such thing as women in general when you look at the women who are enslaved and the women who are slavers. In fact, if you review the history of slavery in the United States, you will find that white women own an incredible amount of African people who were enslaved, men and women. So this thing about women in general is fallacious. And it's something that Africans have to take on, especially those of us who understand that we're engaged in a struggle against colonialism. So a struggle against colonialism is not a struggle for rights within an oppressive system. It is a struggle to overturn the oppressive system that takes all our rights and puts us in the most treacherous conditions that's possible to imagine. But anyway, here we have this issue. And I want to say that it's worth noting that when we having this discussion now, Ruth Bader Ginsburg coffin has been placed at the top on the steps of the Supreme Court of the United States. And people, hundreds of people coming out there to view this and to pay tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court of the United States, that's supposed to be represent some high standard of justice and morality in this country. At the same time this is happening, we hear from Louisville, Kentucky. And from Louisville, Kentucky, we hear that the grand jury that had the task of determining whether or not the police who killed 26-year-old Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky, would be facing criminal charges, or what kind of charges they'd be facing because of this. I think there were 3 cops who were involved in this, involved in this. Excuse me. What that grand jury did on today, and this was put forth at a press conference that was held by the Attorney General of Kentucky, who was an African man. What that grand jury did today was to say that only one of those persons, cops, would be indicted, and that would be for wanton endangerment. None of them, nobody, excuse me, was indicted for murdering Breonna Taylor. But we shouldn't be surprised by that. We saw, similarly, this happened with Mike Brown. Mike Brown was gunned down, he was killed. It goes to a grand jury that held it forever before making a determination. And the cop who killed Mike Brown was let off without anything at all. Similarly, we've seen that happen with other cases where police have blatantly murdered African people. And even in the face of a tremendous amount of protests, the government has allowed those cops to go free, or only at best, excuse me, as in this case, slap their wrist. And I mentioned this because it's not different. Because when you talk about the Supreme Court, you're talking about an organization of the state. And this is something that we must understand. You talk about the Supreme Court, you talk about the police, you're talking about grand juries, you talk about the military. Ginsburg opened up so that women could participate equally as thugs and killers terrorizing peoples around the world. You're talking about the state. And this is something that most people do not understand clearly. And the reason that there is any assumption of understanding by the state, by the majority of the people who are aware of it, is because of this discussion that's happened under the Trump regime, who's accusing some deep state entity of interfering with how he wants to govern. But the state is an entity. It is a bureaucracy that is absolutely necessary. It contains, like, the police and the FBI and the Secret Service and all of these entities, military courts, prisons, etc. This is the state apparatus itself. And this is something that's absolutely necessary to exist if you have a society that is split between haves and have-nots. I'm saying it again and again and again. In such a society, the state is absolutely necessary. If they weren't there, then the society you would see the oppressed peoples always rising up to overturn their oppression, to take back the resources stolen from them. So you have to have a police department. You have to have the prisons and the courts. And all of these, including the Supreme Court, serves the interests of the status quo of the rulers of that society. And that's what the Supreme Court justices in the United States serve that purpose as well. But I think one of the things is that's really interesting to notice at this time in history that we are involved in is that this issue around the Supreme Court, first of all, it really exposes the crisis of this social system. In the first place, what we see is this notion of this impartial Supreme Court that's above the political fray, that is something that makes these holy decisions. That stuff is actually blown out of the water, has been for a while. In fact, I think we've seen only 40-some-odd%, 42% or so of the people in this country believe that the Supreme Court is very just or most just, etc. That's only 40-some% of the people in this court. And most of the institutions in the United States suffer mightily in terms of approval by the people in this country. So that's part of a crisis the system is experiencing. But what deepens this crisis is what's happening now, how Trump rushes out quickly to say, I'm going to put somebody in place right now, as soon as I can. In fact, on Friday or Saturday, it is expected that Trump will make an announcement of the person that he is putting forth to replace Ginsburg, so that before the election, that there can be this person on the Supreme Court who will be more likely to rule in Trump's favor in the event, the likelihood that this election is going to be chaotic and possibly thrown into the courts, like the 2000 election with Gore and Bush. And so to guarantee that Trump can win in that situation, it's extremely important to put somebody else on the Supreme Court that's more likely to vote the way Trump wants to vote to go. That's one aspect of it. But on the other side, the Democrats are saying, no, you got to put our person there. We don't want Trump to make an announcement right now. We want to be able to wait until after the election, so there's a greater likelihood that we can get somebody who believes in what we believe in to sit on the Supreme Court. And so if that doesn't do something that besmirches the whole notion of this impartial entity that's above the political fray, that's looking out for the interests of the people, nothing else can do it. Because what we're being told and what the people in this country and around the world are being told is that your freedom, your rights will not be determined on some inherent justice inside the system, but depending on what political forces in power at any given time, which means that anytime one of these characters die, then you can be thrust back into slavery. You can lose whatever rights that you thought you had just yesterday. This is the situation that you're involved in. You're living a very perilous kind of situation, depending on which way the political winds blow inside this country. And this is a part of the deepening crisis in this country. And this is just one aspect of the crisis in this country. Of course, another aspect of the crisis in this country that we can see is that this ongoing resistance, the struggle that's happening in this country. And part of that struggle was the fact that even when this colonial virus, this so-called pandemic, hit this country, there is no health care system. There is no health care system in this country. And you can call it Obamacare or anything like that. There is no healthcare system. The insurance corporations wrote Obamacare. And the fact is that healthcare, what they call healthcare, is actually ruled by the pharmaceutical companies and institutions and insurance companies to guarantee that profit is going to prevail. So your health is not an issue of there being some kind of system that looks out for it. It looks out for the pharmaceutical corporations. It looks out for the insurance corporations. So this is something that must be understood clearly. So you talk about a Supreme Court that's going to look out for your interests. It's never looked out for your interests. And this is a situation now where the people are forced to now hope that a good white woman or a good Negro woman or a good Latino woman, as they are characterized, is placed in the Supreme Court. That's a really tenuous kind of situation to live with. It's not something, it's not tenable. It's not something that anybody should wish for. So you have this contest now between different sectors of the ruling class. You have Ruth Bader Ginsburg being held up as high moral standards, something that's provided all kinds of rights for women. This person who is on the cutting edge of the democracy, fighting for the rights of the oppressed, etc. And her best friend was Anthony Scalia, who was also on the Supreme Court. And he is what many the leftists call a proto-fascist. Everything that Bader said she was for, including abortion rights, including the rights of women and others, Scalia was opposed to. And yet they hold this up, this relationship that she had with Scalia. They went to operas together. They hung out together in very intimate kinds of situations. This was a real intimate friendship that they had. And they bragged about it, and it's held up. And even the feminists and other people, so-called leftists, say this is the kind of relationship we need. Somebody who's for abortion rights and somebody against abortion rights. She's on both sides of the question. She is with this person who is supposedly somebody who is absolutely opposite in terms of his belief system than what she has. But of course, that's not the case, because what both of them believe in is the system itself, the social system itself. And so this is something that is relatively easy to see. But for African people and for the colonized, it's an extremely important discussion. I am not saying here, I'm not standing here to make some kind of suggestion that the revolution is around the corner and we have to hold firm to make the revolution at this moment. No, I'm not saying that it's possible to make the revolution at this moment. What I am saying is that the system is in a horrible, serious state of crisis. And it's not just that. It's in crisis because the police department that has been held to such high esteem by every ruling institution, including Obama, including Ginsburg, and what have you, held at such high esteem, is something that is despised and openly despised by people throughout this country. And especially the African community who has led, the African people who led the struggle against a vicious, terroristic police department, which is simply another arm of the same state apparatus as the court system is. And so you have a crisis there that nobody believes anything. You can't go on the internet, for one thing, and not see the police killing or brutalizing some African person. And then on the other hand, you can't go on the internet without seeing some African standing up, resisting in some way what the police is trying to do. And increasingly, we see people are willing to pick up a gun and fight against the police in our communities. This is a part of the crisis of the system. The system itself is losing any kind of viability among the people in this country. This crisis is reflected in the fact that you got white people running around with automatic weapons, etc., who are talking about the conspiracy against Trump and how they're willing to fight. And it's recognized this crisis is something is recognized by the ruling class itself that's reporting over and over again about what they expect to be the violence that follows this election, because the people on both sides recognize there's something horribly wrong with this system, and increasingly the people are unwilling to accept the verdicts that come through the institutions of the system. So they're saying that, first of all, they're saying that the election probably is not going to be over when it's supposed to be over. And secondly, they're saying that regardless of who wins this election, there's a great likelihood that it's going to be followed by violence in this country. This is a crisis of the social system where people no longer even have faith and confidence and believe in the institutions of the system itself. And that's part of what it is that we're looking at when we're looking at this issue of who's going to replace Ginsburg. It's an overall crisis in this. It's not just a crisis between the Republicans and the Democrats, although that's a really important manifestation of the crisis, because what it tells us again is that this system, this so-called court system, is not above the political fray. It depends on who's got the political muscle, which means who's got most money, who's got whom elected in these offices and what have you, and what their interests are, and how that's going to be reflected in who goes to the Supreme Court. I was looking at something in the Wall Street Journal today, and it's talking about how the Supreme Court confidence, a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the Supreme Court has declined from 52% from 1987 to 40% today. And they say other institutions have fared worse. Confidence in Congress, the presidency, big business, banks, newspapers, and television news has declined over the last 2 decades. Confidence in Congress, where the fight over the Ginsburg vacancy is about to play out, stands at a mere 13%. And then it goes further. This article talks about how there's a move toward the base of the so-called Democratic Party, how people in the Democratic Party, depending on how this election goes, if Ginsburg is seated by this Senate, and it looks like this is going to happen, that the election will and Biden wins this election. They're talking about changing the rules so that they can add more people to the Supreme Court, and then that a Biden presidency can put somebody else in the Supreme Court to minimize or neutralize the significance of what is happening with this woman, Ginsburg. So I'm just saying, brothers and sisters, this whole notion about this holy Supreme Court, this is the same Supreme Court that ruled with the Dred Scott decision in the 1800s that a Black person has no right, that a white person has to unite with, has to uphold. And the point here is that this is 100 and some odd years later, but any given time that they want to, if you have no rights of your own, you have no power of your own, if you're living under colonial domination, the laws can change. And they can change, and they will always change in the interest of the rulers of this country. And the rulers of this country are white. They're white nationalist colonizers. And they, even if they have different tactical and strategic interests at any given moment, their overwhelming interest is to maintain the social system, and they have done it in the past, collectively, Democrats and Republicans, and they will do it again. To protect the social system, they will sell African people down the drain. They did it in the 1876 elections, where the Republicans stole an election and Africans were part of the Republican Party. And the Democratic Party was leading mobs in the streets talking about they were going to go back to war. This was something like a short time, 11 years or so after the Civil War had ended. And they made a backroom deal called the Tilden-Hayes Compromise, where an agreement was made that the Democrats would allow the Republicans to put their person in power through the electoral, how is it characterized, college. They would allow the Democrat to go in power, But if the Republicans had to remove the troops out of the South that were there protecting African lives, and they did it. And this is when you saw this escalation, this rise in the Ku Klux Klan and terror that was waged against African people throughout this country. So we live in a very serious situation at this point where we rely on these institutions, which are part of the state apparatus that's there in order to protect the status quo, to protect the relationship that exists between the colonized, that's us, and the colonizers, that's white people, and the capitalist system itself. And so that's a very precarious situation to be in. We can't live like that. And that's why what we're saying is that you have to begin to build and unite with the process to overturn this relationship we have with the system itself, because the system kills us. It kills us every day, and it will kill us tomorrow, and it will kill us every day until we overturn this relationship that we have with the system itself. That's what we have to understand, and that has to be something that's clear to all of us. And so that's why what we have done in the African People's Socialist Party is over many years tried to institutionalize the struggle to transfer. We negate the power of the colonial ruling class, negate the power of the colonizer by creating what we call dual power, a dual and contending power. And by that, we don't mean just to have our own power inside their power. It's a dual power that contends with the existing colonial power. That's what we say we have to fight for. That's why in 1982, we built a World Tribunal on Reparations for African People and had an international court to make a determination of whether reparations were due us. That's why even after Mike Brown was killed and the grand jury there in St. Louis County said that the murderer who killed Mike Brown did not commit any offense, we organized a Black people's grand jury to begin winning an understanding among Africans and African people that we have the power ourselves, or we have the ability to create the power ourselves, to using even basic law, even the law of the colonizer, to expose what the reality is and what our relationship to this system is. Even incredible legal documents, papers have been written about that grand jury to show that there has to be another way that we approach this question of justice, and especially for the colonized, because the colonizer cannot give us justice. You can say justice, 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 but the colonizer cannot give us justice. The only thing that approximates justice, the only way it can occur is if we, the colonized, take power over our own lives. And that's why every instance, every opportunity we get, we struggle to negate the power of the colonizer with the growing power of the colonized, with our own power. That's a struggle to overturn colonial relationship, not just in this country, but around the world. African people have to be involved in it, the same thing that Garvey was involved in more than 100 years ago. We have to have that kind of movement. That means that the cowardly stances that many people who say they represent us and who are always on bending knee, one way or another, kowtowing to imperialism, kowtowing to a social system, even kowtowing to liberal imperialism. That's why we have to discard that and move in our own independent interest to create our own independent power that can represent us. And no, it can't happen today. It won't happen today. We're engaged in a protracted struggle. It's going to take a while to do this. We've been working with this inside the African People's Socialist Party for more than 45 years. And we have created independent institutions. We have created independent tribunals. When the police killed us in various places in Detroit or in Philadelphia, in various places, we've called the people together and held tribunals. And what we help the people to understand is that they have their law, and their law works against us. We have to have our law, and we've taken the people, and sometimes even using the colonizer's law or using international law, had a trial, a tribunal, so that people could hear the evidence in our community. Hear the evidence. You have a right to explain yourself and to the world and your understanding. Hear the evidence and then make a judgment based on what you heard and what you perceived. And of course you say, well, okay, you've done that, but what you gonna do now? And what we say is the difference in what they do, because we call what they do mock trials. Some people have called what we do mock trials, and we say theirs are the real mock trials, ours is the real McCoy. The difference in what they do and what we do is that they have the guns, they have formalized this power of the colonizer state with the power to enforce what it is they do. And it tells us that we can do this, we can have our own courts. And now what our objective has to be is to create the capacity to enforce what we know to be the truth. Otherwise, you will forever talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and RBG. She's not our RBG. And if you didn't know it for any other reason, just the way she spoke about Colin Kaepernick when he took a knee. He took a knee because the police are murdering our people in the streets of America. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when asked about it, said she thought it was stupid to do this. And Colin Kaepernick, his response was how he doesn't understand how a Supreme Court justice can think it's stupid to be able to protest police murder, police violence against our people. And that was his way of stating that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she's not our RBG. We have to create our own RBG. Join the African People's Socialist Party. Come with us, because this election is not going to be decided by November 3rd. Come with us and the Black is Black Coalition for Social Justice to Washington, D.C. We're going to be there with a massive mobilization on November 7th. We're going to have a march. We're going to have a rally at Malcolm X Park. We're going to have a march. And then we're going to have another rally across the street from the White House demanding, telling the world that Black power matters, telling the world down with colonialism, and saying that Black community control of the police, which is another anti-colonial statement, which is the other way we move to negate the power of the colonizer and capture our own power over our own lives. And because Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whatever else she may be in the world, she is not our RBG. So go to Black Power, go to blackisbackcoalition.org, blackisbackcoalition.org to get information on the mobilization that we're having, and go to APSP Uhuru, APSPUhuru.org to get more on the African People's Socialist Party. We can win this thing. Their situation is in a state of severe crisis. And that's one thing that we must understand, no matter what this debate is all about. In many ways, what they're doing is trying to distract attention from the crisis of the whole social system and make everybody concentrate somehow on this institution that's called the Supreme Court, to see our future located there. It's not located there. What they're trying to do is generate a sense of patriotism among the masses of people in this country, to try to reinvigorate people to a relationship with the Supreme Court and the other institutions of American imperialism. We have to break free from that. And the African People's Socialist Party gives you an opportunity to do that. So we say, Vanguard up, Uhuru.